It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Welcome to the Amelia Gordon Memorial Lecture in memory of my mother, who personified devotion to education and the Philbrick reading room of this library. I'm Toby Dichter, a proud board member and an unabashed fanatic for this free library. Some of you are here because you're an MSNBC fan of Mehdi Hasan, and others may be just hearing him for the first time. But that's what a library can do for you. It's a knowledge broker that brings new sources and ideas we wouldn't discover in our targeted internet searches. Whether we come to these talks to hear our favorite author or discover new ones, we always learn something, and I certainly hope that ideally we return the favor with our charitable contributions. Tonight, I am proud to present a man who argues for a living. Book just came out Tuesday. He's been all over on a tour already. American journalist Mehdi Hasan is the host of the eponymously titled Mehdi Hasan Show, a news and politics program that airs on MSNBC and on Peacock. He admits he's been arguing his whole life and has made a very successful career of it, first as an op-ed columnist and pundit in the UK, and then a political commentator and interviewer for Al Jazeera English, and now is a cable host on MSNBC and joins other MSNBC hosts we've had here. Actually, sometimes he substitutes for them, Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell. In Win Every Argument, Mr. Hasan actually changes the perception of arguing. And he has argued with the likes of Barack Obama, Boris Johnson, Bernie Sanders, and recently AOC. And I just asked him, I said, so did you give her a hard time, or would it? And he said, well, basically, I kind of agree with her, so. But he still asks very tough questions. He grew up in Harrow, an outer borough of London, and studied at Oxford. He married a Texan and moved to the US in 2015 to work full-time on Al Jazeera on Upfront and host their podcast, which is called The Intercept, from 2018 to 2020. He was also director of the UK edition of the Huffington Post, co-authored a book on Ed Miliband, who challenged his brother David for labor leader, as you may know, and is frequently published op-ed pieces in publications like the Washington Post and the New York Times. By the way, the New York Times review said, this book is impeccably timed at a moment when many people find themselves in arguments. The Guardian probably sums it up best. Anti-establishment muckraker, an unabashed lefty with bias towards democracy. Hasan not only presents a practical guide to the art of rhetoric, he shares a philosophical claim for good faith arguments and their value to democracy. Conducting the conversation tonight is Marc Lamont Hill, host of BET News and the Coffee and Books podcast, and he holds a chair in Media, Cities, and Solutions at Temple University. He's the author of 6 books, including Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics. So to balance this kind of awesome respect we have, unless you think that these people are infallible, here's the endearing inscription of Mr. Hasan's book. To my wife, the love of my life, and the only person I can never seem to win an argument with. That already resonates with this crowd, right? So let's give them a warm welcome, Marc Lamont Hill and Mehdi Hasan.
Good evening, everybody. This is going to be fun. Oh, thank you. I promise I've read this already. They're bringing me a nice hard copy. I'm so excited to be in conversation with Mehdi Hasan. It's always an honor to be in conversation with you.
You're too kind, Mark. I was just saying to Mark before we came out, the last time I saw Mark before the pandemic, I was interviewing him on stage in Seattle, so now the roles are reversed. I'm trying to remember if I was nice to him in that interview.
You were not, sir.
So we'll see how...
I got my points all lined up. Your book
reciprocity.
Set me up perfectly for
Time
this debate.
for reciprocity.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's funny, because we go really way back. We worked at HuffPost together.
Yes. Oh, you used to interview me then, yes.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
I was in England. And
yeah.
Yes.
And then you were at Al Jazeera, and then he left Al Jazeera, and then I started hosting up front after he left, and now he's at MSNBC. So I'm waiting for your next big job so I can follow you in the...
Stop it.
So this book is incredible. I hope you all have had an opportunity to read it. If not, you'll read it when you leave here. I often ask people this question. It's a basic question, but it's an important one. Why this book? Why now?
So, I'm a very argumentative person. And when I said to people, I'm writing a book and it's called Win Every Argument, people said to me, yeah, that's you. That's the book you were meant to write. And not all of them said it in a good way. Some of them in a good way, some of them like, yeah, that's you. So it's something personal to me. I feel strongly about the issue. It's who I am. But also, I genuinely, strongly, passionately believe in the power of argument and debate. I believe it is fundamental to the survival of democracy, a free press, a functioning society. You cannot have a public space, a public square, if people are not willing to have good faith disagreement, debate, discussion. And I look around at our country and the world right now, and when I see the grifters and gaslighters and BS merchants degrading our public discourse, polluting our public debate, I felt the need to write a book to say, you know what, here are the skills, here are the techniques, here are the lessons that you can use to push back. Because, you know, I find that a lot of people have a lot of good ideas. There are a lot of smart people out there, but unless you can communicate them well, it's pointless. Like if a tree falls in a wood, it's the same principle. Yeah. And I strongly believe, another thing that really winds me up is people say, well, you know, Mehdi, you're a TV show host. Oh, you've been a big mouth. You came out of the womb like this. Natural-born orators. And I don't buy that. I think that everyone, no, I don't buy that. I think everyone has the ability to give that speech that they might dream of giving, to make that argument that they might dream of making. And I talk about in the book, I give many examples of people we consider today to be legendary orators who began as awful orators, but they put in the work and they did the development to get to where they are today.
You know, I expected this to be a book about politics and and you were using the kind of trope of the debate as a kind of through line to make all of your arguments for why these people are grifters.
Surprised you?
It's really, like, I teach journalism at Temple. I'm literally going to have my students read this book to have kind of analysis.
Because one of the audiences is my colleagues in the media. One of the target audiences is, how do we do journalism in this country? How do we do interviews in this country? How do we hold power to account? How do we stop people from bullshitting all over the airwaves? Yeah. And I offer some suggestions.
So one of the things you talk about in the book is, first of all, knowing your audience. Who am I talking to when I make a decision to engage this way or that way? Talk a little bit about that, but in the context of contemporary media, has the audience for news, has the audience for politics changed?
So let's go backwards. I'll take the second half first. I think it has. I think we've become far more tribal, far more polarized. I think 10, 20 years ago, more people were watching more channels. I think people had a more diverse media diet. I think today, for good reasons and bad, people are much more stuck in their own silos and communities and tribes and watching things that they agree with. And that's a problem for many, many reasons. It makes it hard for people to do their job. Like we were just talking beforehand in the green room, some of us, and I was making the point that I'm on MSNBC, and a lot of Democrats come on MSNBC expecting a soft ride. And a lot of MSNBC viewers who are loyal Democrats don't want to see the people they like be grilled. They want to see the people they don't like be grilled. And I'm someone who likes to grill everyone. So It's not always a popular position. Jen Psaki has done a blurb on the back of the book. She's a colleague of mine now, launching a show on MSNBC. But when she was White House press secretary, she gave a very nice blurb saying I was one of her toughest interviews. I grilled her on the 11th hour, which is the 11 p.m. show that Brian Williams retired from. And, the backlash I got from viewers. How dare you? How dare you speak to the White House secretary, press secretary like that? Brian Williams would never have spoken to her like that.
True.
I'm like, but I'm a journalist, and she's the press. You may like her. I like Jen. You may prefer Joe Biden in the White House to Donald Trump. So do I. But my job is to hold the powerful to account. She is the press secretary for the most powerful man on earth. I'm going to ask her some tough questions, even if that bothers the audience. Now, come back to your original point. Knowing your audience, winning over the audience is key. For far too often, when we're thinking about an argument or a presentation we need to make, we think about what sounds good to us, when really we need to be thinking about what sounds good to a room full of strangers. And we kind of underplay, we underestimate the power of the audience. I mean, even these events are so good because I do a show sitting in a studio, as do you up front. It's a studio-based show. Yeah. It's just you, a guest, and a camera jib operator, whatever it is. Yeah. There's another show I used to do at Jazeera English called Head to Head, which was a completely different show because you're in front of a live audience. And in the book, I call a live audience a kind of force amplifier, force multiplier. It gives you huge strength because you know if you have the audience on your side, it's kind of like the wind in your sails. Yeah. And too many people turn up not thinking about how they're going to appeal to the audience. And too often we're in an argument with someone, we're in a debate with someone, and we're just thinking about, well, how do I change their mind? Often you're not going to change that person's mind. Often that's not even your goal. Your goal is the independent third person, the neutral party watching at home. People say, what is the point of interviewing this person who has such extreme views? Well, I'm not trying to change that person's views. I'm trying to show the audience at home or the audience at the hall that there's another side to the argument or that their views may be false. And, you know, there's Billy Wilder has a famous quote. He says, you know, an individual may be an imbecile, but 1,000 imbeciles sitting together in the dark, that's critical genius, right? Yeah. They can't be wrong. Yeah. So that's what you've got to do when you're planning ahead. You've got to think about who that audience, I talk about in the book. How do you open? How do you address the people? What do you talk about yourself? Like, I want to talk to you all today, and you say, why do I write the book? I want to tell you a story about how my father was a very disputatious person, is a very disputatious person, was very much so when he was a younger man, and challenged my sister and I at the dinner table, challenges in the car, challenges on vacation. We had to kind of defend ourselves and justify our positions and beliefs. My father is a man who in the late 1980s, when Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses, was being burned by some Muslims in northern cities, buys a copy of Satanic Verses and puts it on our dining room bookshelf on the shelf, so when all of our Muslim community friends come round, they say, why are you what is that doing here? My father's position was, how can you reject it if you don't know what's in it, if you haven't read it? So that was the position. It was a very John Stuart Mill-esque position from a very young age, and that informs who I am. So that's the story I want to tell, and I say, you know, talk to an audience, I want you to know a little bit about me. That's what you should do. I want you to know who I am when we're talking tonight.
Does the fact that we've become more tribalistic attribute to the decline in quality debate skill? In other words, if everybody on Fox News already agrees, you don't really have to learn to hone an argument.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the tribalism is there's a multiplicity of reasons for why America has become more tribal. I do think getting out of tribalism has become much harder and cutting through because so much BS is around, because we have given up on the art of rhetoric, the art of debate, because people today don't even follow basic rules. I mean, I dedicate a whole chapter of the book to kind of Donald Trump style, which is called the Gish Gallop. There's a name for it in debate circles called the Gish Gallop, where you're just completely steamrolling your opponent with an endless barrage of kind of deflections, distractions, distortions, inaccurate statements, and the other person doesn't have a chance to respond because it's done at speed, it's done at volume. That kind of stuff is an insult to our intelligence, but it's an insult to the audience, but it's a cynical strategy that works. You see now the mini Trumps that are proliferating in America, who are all following the same style of kind of steamrolling your opponent, not caring about facts, not caring about conventions. You saw Chris Wallace, a former Fox interviewer, at the first debate in 2020, unable to control it. Remember the chaos where Trump is telling a lie once every 9 seconds in the space of 2 minutes, and Wallace can't even jump in to stop it. Like that, you got to say, what is happening? And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, to say, come on, we got to. Those of us who care about speech and debate and who care about facts and reality, we got to find a way to push back.
So there's two ways you can push back, and in the book, there's times where you have us push back one way and yes, other times another way. One way is to say, you guys aren't playing fair, right? You don't steamroll your opponent. You don't do an ad hominem. You don't, you play by the rules. You analyze the right way to debate, and then we learn to do that. Then there are times where it's like, okay, well, if you can't beat them, right? So you know what? I'm going to do an ad hominem too. I'm going to focus on, I'm going to commit logical fallacies, because my opponent does. There's a way that I'd love to say, look, Trump is a terrible person, a terrible debater, and we should just stop doing that. And there's another way that I want to train a group of people to just be the left-wing version of Trump, so that we can win. I know it's not an ideal situation, but you might have to do what you have to do. How do you negotiate those two things?
So I think you negotiate it depending on the context. A lot of people say, well, when do you do this and when do you do that? Well, this book is, I mean, I wrote this for a general, broad audience. I did not write this, as you say, for a political audience or for people who agree with me. So my point is, well, I was at an event yesterday in DC and someone, well, where would you say, where would I do an ad hom? Where would I do I have a lot of techniques and tips in the book. And I said, it depends where you are. Are you a lawyer? Are you a prosecutor in court trying to win over a jury? Are you someone in the boardroom trying to close a deal? Are you just arguing with your uncle at the Thanksgiving table? Like, who is your opponent? Who is your adversary? What are you trying to achieve? Who is your target? I talk in the book, you've got to be flexible. I have a chapter in the book called Judo Moves. You've got to be flexible. You've got to yield at times. You've got to be able to kind of trip people up, maybe catch them off guard. And so, for example, there is a chapter on ad hominem attacks.
Yes. Can we pull on that for a minute? Because you give me you give some really great examples here, and I love the examples you give in the book. So there are 3 types of ad hominems. 3. One is the abusive ad hominem, right? That's Donald Trump.
You're a liar.
Right, exactly. Or Donald Trump on the podium saying crooked Hillary, and so forth and so on. He had a name for everybody, right? So if you're thinking about the current political moment, let's assume Trump is relatively successful in the primary circuit. And I'm not saying he's going to win, but let's just say he's competitive. And so he's on the circuit, and we don't want him to win. When people are debating him and he's calling them crooked so-and-so and lazy so-and-so, should we be yelling back, liar Trump and crooked Trump? I mean, in the political context, is it better to sort of fight fire with fire, as they say?
The short answer is yes. I mean, we can argue about tone and name calling, but look, let's take Trump, for example. I was one of those journalists who said from 2016 onwards, when I was at Al Jazeera, and then when I joined MSNBC, that we should be calling these things lies. The man lies, right? Now we all say, oh, Trump's a liar. That wasn't the case. Those of you who have longer memories, 2016, 2017, 2018, journalists would bend over backwards, pull out the thesaurus to use every possible word except lie.
Yes.
Oh, it's a half
so true.
Oh, it's a false. Oh, it's an inaccuracy. Same with racism. Do you remember that? It was racially tinged, racially charged, racially challenged. It's racist.
Right.
Just say racist. Fewer letters. So the R word, the L word, the F word, fascism. I was the first person as an anchor on MSNBC to talk about fascism in the summer of 2020 after we were sending out law enforcement to crack down on George Floyd social justice protesters. Yeah. So these words matter, right? And a very important part of the book is that words matter. The language that you use in a debate matters. The language you use in an interview matters. And I give the example of the ad hominem attacks. People say, don't go ad hom. You can't go ad hom. Play the ball, don't play the man. I say that's nonsense. Go back to Aristotle. Aristotle says there's 3 ways you win an argument. You appeal through pathos, through emotion. You appeal through logos. You appeal through rational arguments, evidence-based argument. And then there's ethos. There's your personal credibility, your character, your expertise, your qualifications. You want to amplify your own, and you want to minimize your opponents. Now, the idea is, and I talk about the different ad hominem, if you're in a debate with someone and they are stressing their own personal qualities and skills, of course you want to question and challenge that. Nothing wrong with that. People who say that's off limits, they don't know what they're talking about. They're living in some utopian, abstract, idealistic world. In the real world, we all know that people's qualifications and character and background matters. So I say abusive ad hominem. I'm not saying go call your opponent, you're ugly, you're fat. I'm not saying that, of course. That is a Trumpian. But I'm saying if your opponent has a history of lying, and you're in front of an audience, it is your responsibility to tell the audience, don't trust that person. They have a history of lying. Now, you might say, well, that's a logical fallacy. That you should engage only with the argument, not the arguer. No, that's nonsense. Of course it's relevant if trust is at issue. Similarly, the circumstantial ad hominem, which is somebody's circumstance, if there's a conflict of interest. If I say, you know what, fossil fuels are great, climate change is a myth, and I'm paid by ExxonMobil, you know what? I'm going to point out the dude's paid by ExxonMobil. That's a part of the argument. That's a relevant point. People should be aware of that. And the third one I give the example is the tu quoque, which is the U2, the hypocrisy ad hominem.
That's the one that I struggled with a little bit.
In what sense? So that's my favorite.
I know. So it's the U2 example, right? So there are plenty of Republican lawmakers, just as an example, who are...
The example that I use.
Yes, who are anti-choice. And when you dig through the receipts, to use another thing you pull out of the book, when you dig through their backgrounds, you often find that they have engaged and they have exercised choice. They have influenced the choices of their romantic partners and others. They are very pro-choice in their private lives and anti-choice in their personal lives. And I'm not sure, I've always struggled with this. Because I think it cheapens the argument. I worry that it cheapens the argument.
So it cheapens the argument only if you're in a university auditorium and you're trying to win a class on logic. then it cheapens the argument. But that's not where we are. You're on a political stage. You're in a journalistic conversation. The point, you're right, it might be a logical fallacy to say, you know what, the fact that a guy paid his mistress to have an abortion doesn't affect the actual moral debate about whether the fetus has a right to life. I agree. But the point is, life is not just a series of arguments about logic, about premises and conclusions. Life is about persuasion, about convincing people, about questioning people's lifestyle. If you're advancing an argument that you yourself cannot adhere to, it is fair game to say to the audience or say to that person, why should we take your advice on this if you can't live by? Maybe what you're advancing, it sounds great on paper. Maybe the premises and the conclusion all follow. But if you can't stick to it in your own daily life, why shouldn't we cast more scrutiny on that? Why shouldn't we look at that with a more critical eye? And again, this isn't about some kind of abstract. My daughter does high school debate. I would never let my daughter use any of the arguments in this book. She'd lose. Because high school debate is just a ridiculous set of rules. There's so many rules. And it's like, that's not real life. I don't know what we're training our kids to do. Guess what? When they get into the real world, they'll discover that your opponent does fight dirty. They'll discover that people are not rational creatures who score points on a paper and say, well, 70. Look at the Democrats. I talk about that in another chapter. Democrats who turn up for debates and say, well, if I just cite 17 more polls and 6 more statistics, we will win this argument. And the other person saying, lock her up, build a wall, ban Muslims, and winning, right? That is the real world. So I'm trying to say in this book, like, if you're in a high school debate, fine, don't do any of this stuff. But if you're in the real world, understand how human beings operate, understand how the brain works, understand how emotions operate, and then try and win people over to your side.
You're right. I mean, you're right. This stuff clearly works. But everything in this book works. Be very clear.
You know, if ad hominem arguments are so bad, why are they so useful?
Right. And why do they feel so good, right?
And you're an idiot if you don't follow them.
Right, exactly. I worry about, I know you're someone who cares about the state of the political debate.
Yeah.
And I won't lose any sleep if I win the choice argument by the wrong means, right? If I don't follow.
But I'm going to push back a little. I don't think it is the wrong means. I'll give you one example. So I interviewed Dr. Monica Gandhi, who's a San Francisco physician, very prominent in the COVID debates, been all over the media, a favorite of NPR and others, CNN. She came on my show. I'm not a fan of Dr. Gandhi because she has taken positions on the pandemic that have repeatedly turned out to be wrong.
Absurd.
And yet she's treated with great deference because of her qualifications. And that's a classic example where if you are advancing a pro hominem argument, if you're saying, trust me, I'm a doctor, look at my white coat, look at my expertise and qualification, it's well within my right to say, okay, well, let's look at your record. Let's look at your record of making decisions about health and public health. And I did an interview with her in which I spent several minutes asking her one question. The one question was an epically long question in which I read out every single prediction that she got wrong about the pandemic. And at the end of it, I said, why should we trust you in the future? Now, she was very offended by it. She was very upset about it because she saw that as a personal attack.
And
I see that as very relevant.
That is super relevant.
But by the strict definitions of ad hominem, it's an ad hominem attack.
Absolutely.
We're not talking about does the vaccine work or not or whether masks work or not. We're talking about her.
But if somebody says being gay is wrong, and then you find out that they're closeted, right? Not only do I not win the argument at the intellectual level, because they could argue it's still a sin and I'm just a really bad sinner, right? Or, I got an abortion. I don't believe in abortion, but I got one because that's why we need to stop the laws, to stop weak people from me from getting them. I worry that you would not only lose it at the kind of abstract level, but that maybe we actually create compassion for the person who's on the other side of it.
Yes.
That scares me.
Agree. And it depends how you do. All of these things, it depends how you do. I talk about, do certain things in moderation.
Yes.
I talk about, for example, on the other side of it, we talked about the kind of aggressive side of the book, and there's lots of aggression in the book because I want to win. But there is also some defensiveness and some concessions in the book. I write, as I mentioned, there's a chapter on judo moves, and I talk about concession.
Yep.
A lot of people in an argument, when your back's against the wall, your opponent has a great point, or you don't know what to say, they double down, which is the worst thing you could possibly do. You've seen that. You've seen it in politics. You've seen it in TV. I say don't do that. I say concede. There's no cost to conceding. It's actually a good thing.
Why is it so hard?
I think it's A, psychological. Nobody wants to admit that they're wrong, including me. And number two, people think that you're going to lose because you've conceded. When in actual fact, and the Greeks were the master, ancient Greeks, a lot of this book goes back to ancient Greece, they had this phrase synchresis, which is this idea that you concede a point here, in order to come back with a stronger point there.
Yes.
Right? There's a strategy to that as well. It's not you're not just being conciliatory and looking open-minded and not like a rigid ideologue to the crowd. You're saying, you know what? You got this one. You can have this point. You can have this argument. Don't double down. Don't just be obdurate and stubborn. So I say in the book, it's depending on where you are and what you're doing, adjust. To go back to the first chapter about the audience, who are you trying to convince? If you're trying to convince your uncle at the Thanksgiving table about why you shouldn't build a wall at the southern border, is your uncle at the Thanksgiving table going to be convinced because you've got a bunch of statistics from Customs and Border Patrol about how many people have come across the border? No, but your uncle might be convinced if you can find some shared story, identity. Hey, you say to your uncle, do you remember when our great-grandfather came here together? Do you remember the family we created in this country? Do you know, that is the approach you want to take with that. But with another person, you might want to take a different approach. It depends who you're up against. We need to be able to vary. I talk in great detail about the book, about when you're really thinking through giving any kind of public presentation, what's your tone of voice? What's your facial expression? What's your posture? Depends on, again, where are you? Are you in a big auditorium? Are you in a small, more intimate space? Yeah. People have spent millennia thinking about this stuff. Like Cicero was thinking about this stuff centuries ago. And I feel like we have now lost that today, especially in an age of social media where you're kind of dunking on each other online, where you don't have to worry about your body language or posture. It's just kind of click, click. And I'm trying to say all of this stuff matters. The people who do it best get this stuff. And it helps you advance broader goals. You say, it's not a strictly political book, but it's not a party political book, but it is a book about principles. I do believe that if you do this stuff, you are advancing a small d democratic cause. It is good for small d democracy, for people to be able to debate, defend their positions, advance their causes, especially, as I say, in an age where there are people going around and say facts don't matter anymore. There are alternative facts. Truth isn't the truth. When you're dealing with people like that, you've really, and I have a whole chapter on the importance still of factual argument and why factual argument still matters. And I think it's really important that we learn this stuff, because if you don't learn this stuff, we as a nation are screwed.
Yeah. One of the things that I found really helpful in the book, and it's something that I've watched you do masterfully on television, is sort of extol the virtues of listening. You talk a lot about the importance of listening. Now, there's listening because it's like it's a humanistic project, right? So you should listen to others. You should hear other people's voice. But again, you slide in the jujitsu too. You're like you listen. You listen so that you can win.
Yeah.
You listen so that you can you can fact. I mean, you gave an example in the book about the your debate in the UK or
the Islam debate.
Around Islam. And when I read it in the book, I was like, actually, that's the only thing I remember from the video. I mean, I knew you won the debate, but that's the only specific detail I could remember was you fact checking someone on Saudi Arabia,
yes,
right? Which a little bit of a dunk, right?
Yeah,
but brilliant. Talk to me about listening, and because I'm not sure when people watch you, they realize how carefully you're listening because you're winning the argument through talking.
Also, in general, I'm a bad listener. When I said to my wife, I'm writing a chapter on listening, she said, "You're writing a chapter on listening." First she laughed. Then she stopped and she said, "Seriously, you're writing a chapter on listening?" And I said, "I know, but I have to. It's part of it's an important part of the strategy. We all have to work at it. None of us really are good listeners. Most people are not good listeners, but especially married men. But But I say in the book, Mark's right. Even that is a very strategic point. I'm not saying listen for kumbaya purposes. I'm not saying listen for humanistic purposes. I'm saying listen because it will help you. It will help you get what you want. And there's two types of listening I talk about in the book. There's critical listening. The listening when the person you're debating or opposing or interviewing or trying to defeat is speaking and saying stuff that is inaccurate. How are you going to know what they're saying if you're not paying attention? Too often in debates, we're not listening, we're waiting for our chance to speak. That's what we're really doing. And when you do that, you're not actually paying attention. And Mark makes the point, like, one of the reasons I do what I do and I get away with what I do is because I catch things that other people haven't caught, because I'm listening very carefully. Is that an inconsistency? Did they just contradict themselves from what they said a moment ago? Is that something I can use? That is critical listening, keeping your mind open, paying attention, taking notes, something, a lost art of note-taking. Very, very important in the modern era, especially with a pen and paper, old school. And then there's empathetic listening, which is even harder. Stephen Covey, the famous author, said it's the highest form of listening. You're listening not just with your ears, but with your eyes, with your heart. That is really hard. And that's a different type of listening. That is a listening that you use to try and engage with a broader audience. That's not to try and dunk.
Yeah.
That is to try and find a bond, make a connection, to walk a mile in another person's shoes, to use the cliche. This idea that the person is being heard, and I can say this to all of you tonight. You came here tonight, and I say this about all audiences. Audiences come not just to see someone, but to be seen. Not just to hear someone, but to be heard. And I hope we'll hear from you in the discussion part. But Bill Clinton, and I have many criticisms of Bill Clinton, was a master when it came to empathetic listening. He was a great speaker because he was a great listener, not in spite of being a great listener. And I give the example in the book at the 1992 Richmond Town Hall, the very first presidential town hall in American history, where George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and hilariously Ross Perot are all on stage together, and a woman in the audience asks, "How has the national debt affected you personally?" And George Bush Sr., while she asks the question, is staring at his watch because he doesn't want to be there, he doesn't want to listen. And then he gives a long, rambling answer about interest rates, which she didn't ask about. And then Bill Clinton gets off his stool, walks towards this lady in the audience, looks her in the eye, and says, "Tell me how it affected you." And she speaks, and he listens, and he turns the tables. And people say he wins the election that night in many ways. It was a crucial moment for Bush. Bush Sr. admits it was a nightmare for him. And that kind of listening, people think it's just about speaking. Bill Clinton showed in that moment that actually turning the tables, becoming the listener, it's actually of great value to him and his campaign and his stature in front of the American audience. So I talk in the book about the importance. It's not an easy thing to do. A lot of the lessons in this book, there are 16 chapters, a lot of them are not easy. They're meant to be hard. One of the reasons I wrote this book is because it annoys me as someone who does this for a living when people think you can just wing it. Right? People come up to you, I'm sure Mark after say, "Oh, that was great. You must have," and they have no idea how much effort you put into that segment, that interview, that monologue. And I see people who are doctors. My mother's a doctor. I see people who go to medical school and study for years. People who are accountants, study for years, get their spreadsheet. And then there's people who think, "Oh, well, you go on TV. I'll just do that. I'll just do that tomorrow. 2 minutes of prep." And I'm saying, no, put in the same effort that you put into all those other walks of life. In fact, I would argue this walk of life is tougher than all those other ones because people are intimidated by coming up on stage. You know, the polls show that Americans regard speaking in public as the number one fear. The number one fear. Number two is death.
Wow.
Right? Number one is speaking in public.
Wow.
Jerry Seinfeld has a great line on this. He said, when you look at those polls, what they mean is that if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. Right? That's what that means. That's how intimidated people are by public speaking. And yet, there's this weird inferiority, superiority complex at the same time, where this is really scary, but if I have to do it, I'll just do it without any prep. Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. And the last third of the book, the book is divided into 3 sections, and the third section is all about the behind-the-scenes prep. And I call it the WBD section. You know, people might say, worthy but dull. Oh, homework, brainstorming, delivery, practice. I know all that, but that's the most crucial part. That is what you have to put the time and effort in. And I give examples from history. People like Demosthenes, the great ancient Greek rhetorician, speaker, lawyer. The guy is regarded as the father of modern rhetoric. He's inspired everyone from the founding fathers of the United States to the French Resistance. And yet, in his 20s, he's an awful public speaker. He's laughed out of court when he tries to fight for his inheritance. What does he do? He goes and builds himself a kind of Batman-style underground cavern, and he goes and exiles himself underground for 6 months. He shaves off half of his head so he'll be too embarrassed to go out in public, to make himself stay down there in front of a mirror where he just practices delivering speeches, practices speaking. He has shortness of breath, so he runs up a hill outside the cave in the middle of the night with pebbles in his mouth to break his stammer and stutter. This guy spends months and months. Today we remember him, the classicists remember Demosthenes as the great orator, right? The perfect orator. But he didn't start that way. Right? He worked his way towards that. I give the example of Churchill, fight them on the beaches. This great man who inspired the UK to win World War II, and yet in his 20s, he stands up in the House of Commons and he can't finish a sentence in a speech, and he gets heckled. You've seen Prime Minister's Questions in London. He gets heckled from all sides in the chamber and sits down red-faced, embarrassing. That's never going to happen to me again. Spends the next few years giving speeches everywhere he can to practice. He speaks while walking on the street, does ridiculous riddles to get rid of his own stammer. His valet hears him murmuring in the bathroom and comes running, says, "Sir, can I help you?" And he goes, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the House of Commons. He's practicing sitting in the bathtub, speaking to the House of Commons. Right? That is the kind of effort that these people put in. I talk about MLK and some of the, we think of I Have a Dream. The I Have a Dream speech was the culmination of multiple speeches where he was workshopping across the country. He's working on it at 3 o'clock in the morning, changing words here and there. These people are rhetorical geniuses. They had to practice, prepare, train. And we think, I'll just wing it. Yeah. And I said, no.
In the contemporary era, we're in the post-Clinton moment now. Who are the figures who you see as extraordinary? I know you've mentioned Barack Obama in the book. Who are some others?
So someone I think is underrated, and I was disappointed in what happened to her presidential campaign, was Elizabeth Warren in 2020. And I say in the book that for me, whatever you think about Elizabeth Warren, you can like her, not like her, vote for her, not vote for her. I would argue that whatever she does between now and the rest of her life and the end of her political career, we will all collectively owe her a debt for single-handedly destroying Michael Bloomberg's presidential candidacy in the space of 60 seconds on stage in Las Vegas at the Democratic presidential debate. And I talk about that in the book, where in 59 seconds, she reduces his multi-million-dollar campaign to rubble. He withdraws from the race weeks later. Wikipedia that night changed the entry for Bloomberg to read, date of death, cause of death, Elizabeth Warren. Right? That's what happened to his Wikipedia page. Because Elizabeth Warren was a high school debate champion. She went to GW, I believe, on a debate scholarship. She prepares. I spoke to her team about that. She spent a week just preparing for that Vegas debate, knowing she'd be next to Bloomberg and knowing she wanted to take out Bloomberg, no matter what else she does. She comes along in 59 seconds, absolutely perfectly timed, perfectly delivered. She bang, 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 bang. So I see that kind of preparation and delivery is so important. I think it's really, I think if you watched the day that Ilhan Omar was removed from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gave a speech on the floor about bigotry. I urge you all to watch it if you haven't watched it on YouTube. It is a fantastic speech in which, and I talk in the book about the emotional appeal, about pathos. She doesn't get into statistics about Muslims and terrorism. She doesn't talk about, well, the Republicans did this, we did. She just gives a passionate appeal to people's decency, to talk about what people like Ilhan Omar and Ilhan Omar's community are having to go through. It's a fantastic piece of oratory, and I think people know her to be great at dunking on social media, etc.
Yes,
but she's actually, if you watch her floor speeches and her interventions in committees, she's actually a very eloquent speaker in that level as well.
We've talked about social media a few times now, and we're going to go to you all in just a few minutes, so prepare your questions. And we've often talked about it as a kind of space of departure from traditional debate, traditional discourse, maybe even good old-fashioned proper debate. In what ways does social media enhance our ability to do this stuff? And in what ways does it change the terrain itself?
That's a great question. So I think, let's start with the second. It ruins it in the sense that it's very easy just to like something, dunk something, do the quick snark. And it frustrates me sometimes when I want to get into something. And I'm one of these people who's, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, right?
Same.
I'm addicted to it. I love it. I can't live without it. When it looked like it might collapse one night a few months ago, I was having palpitations. My wife's like, what is wrong with you? Right? You have 2 kids, go spend some time with your children. I was like, which children? But on the other hand, I have a hate, it's the hell site. Oh my God, you can't discuss anything on here. People misunderstand, and there's a mob mentality and all that stuff. So I think there are a lot of downsides in the sense that, it does corrode our discourse. It does lead to just people looking for quick adrenaline hits and dopamine hits. But on the other hand, I would argue that a lot of the lessons in the book do apply to social media. When I argue with people on social media, one of the good things about social media is that you can bring receipts very quickly in a way that you can't in a public debate. If I'm arguing with you in the street and you say something's factual, what do? Go pull my phone out and start Googling and show, or in the old days, get it Encyclopedia Britannica and bring. No, now in Twitter, you go click, link, here you go, receipt. If I dunk on someone on Twitter, I often add the link. I'll be like, didn't you say this? Right. Click, and then I put the link.
This you is like the...
This you, exactly. So, and Ted Cruz gets a lot of that. Yeah. So, so that's one of the advantages. You can bring receipts, which is one of the chapters in the book, on Twitter very well. You can do ad hominem. You can do very well on Twitter.
Yes.
There is a lot of things you can do in terms of the art of the zinger. I have a chapter in the middle of the book. The middle of the book is all about the kind of tricks of the trade, some of the spicier techniques to get you out of a hole.
Booby trapping.
Some of the booby trapping and the zinger and the one-liner. And that you can do on Twitter a lot. I mean, Twitter is all about the one-liner. It was, at least until recently, all about brevity. And some of the best tweets and the best comebacks are those which are very short, pithy, to the point. AOC also very good at that. So I think that social media has done different things to our ability to debate and discuss. I mean, the problem is, one thing you can't really do on social media in the same way, to go back, is one of the things I feel most strongly about, which is pathos, the emotional appeal. If you want to raise heart, if you want soaring rhetoric that's going to move people's hearts and move them to action, rabble rouse, rally people, call to arms, you're never going to get that from a tweet. Nope. You're never going to get that from a Facebook post. You're never going to get that from any kind of,
maybe a video.
Maybe, exactly. If you share the video, but the video, then it just becomes the platform. You're still really being inspired by that person's oratory. And I think that is what's really missing. And I talk about in the book, the grand finale, like, when we want to sum up and we want to really drive people home, some of the best speakers are those who know how to end, who know how to bring things to a close. And there's a quote I use in the book that a lot of public speakers use, which is, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. Right? That is months later. They're like, I can't remember what that guy got me feeling the right way. That's how a lot of people vote. That's why people vote. People don't vote based on policy. They don't vote because some candidate has a 17-point childcare plan. They vote because that person made them feel good. That person they trust. That person inspired them. So I think that you can't do on social media. That you got to do the old-fashioned way.
Thank you very much for your talk. Very inspirational. I really appreciate it very much. The question that I have is, to the point earlier about Donald Trump basically coming machine gun style with, just so much ammunition, whereas in the past, when a lie was something to be embarrassed about or something to be, explained, I mean, there's really none of that. I mean, it's just machine gun style. There's 10 things, and when you try to fact check or to fight them, you get 25 more. It's like a hydra that another head grows. I guess the point is that it seems to me that the proper retaliation would be to somehow rebuke some of that, but then you don't want to play defense all the time because then that other person owns the argument.
Agreed, 100%. And I say that in the book. What you don't want to do in a debate is be on the defensive. You want to put your opponent on the back foot. And when I talk about the Gish Galapa, this is the phrase that's used in debate circles. It's named after a guy called Duane Gish, who was a Christian creationist who used to debate evolutionary biologists. You can go and watch him on YouTube. And he would win these debates, even though these people were eminently qualified, knew the science inside out. But, with the greatest respect, most scientists are not great public speakers, haven't really been trained in that way. So they, the evolutionary biologist turns up with 17 peer-reviewed studies. The audience doesn't care about that. Duane Gish would turn up with humor, an anecdote, and then he would do the machine gun style of throwing a bunch of cherry-picked quote, distorted statistics, fake studies, a blizzard, to which the scientists couldn't respond in detail. And the audience might think, well, the scientists didn't respond to everything that Gish said. Maybe Gish has got a point.
Right.
And Donald Trump has either knowingly or unknowingly borrowed that style where you just go rat-a-tat-tat, one lie after another, and the person at home doesn't know what to think. And I say in the book, look, there's no silver bullet to stopping this stuff. I mean, this stuff is done deliberately. Let's be clear. This is not an accident. Steve Bannon, don't take my word for it, Steve Bannon famously said in an interview with Michael Lewis, our opponents are not the Democratic Party. Our opponents are the media. And the way you deal with the media is to flood the zone with shit. That was his phrase. Right? And that's what they've done. They flooded the zone. And Trump does this so well. And I say in the book, look, there's a three-part strategy that I advise in the book that my fellow interviewers, journalists, people hosting debates, politicians should do to try and stop it. Number one, pick your battle. Donald Trump throws 100 lies at you. Forget 99 of them. Yeah. Pick one. Pick the most ridiculous, dumbest, most outrageous lie and rebut that, mock that, ridicule that, highlight that. So that the audience is like, well, if that's one of them, maybe I shouldn't trust the rest. That's number one. Number two, don't budge. This is the bane of my life as someone who does interviews and watches interviews. You've seen it on TV. Politician says some nonsense. Interviewer goes to the next question.
We're trained to
follow up.
Yeah.
Do the follow-up question. Don't just move on to the next subject. And a lot of interviews in this country, I get it. I'm on cable news on Sunday nights. You got to go to ad break. You've got time constraints. You want to ask 7 different topics because they're all in the news. You've got a member of Congress. I have to ask about immigration and education and the economy and COVID. I say less is more. Don't ask a couple of questions, get answer to those questions. I interviewed a guy called Steve Rogers, a Trump advisor in 2018, sadly not Captain America. And he just would not accept that Trump was lying about steel mills. Trump had said there were 6 new steel mills that had been announced by U.S. Steel. And I said, no, this was on up front.
It's pinned on his Twitter account. Make sure you
want to
watch
watch it. And I said, but Trump did, but U.S. Steel said there were no steel mills. He meant there's more steel. I said, no, that's not what he said. He said 6 steel mills. Where are they? No. What he meant is manufacturing. But where are the 6 steel mills? Trump said 6 steel mills. He said that steel is doing better. No, he said 6 steel mills. So I kept going. He wasn't used to this because he's used to the interviewer saying, okay, let's talk about something else now.
Yeah.
At one point, he says, just move on. Are you producing me now? I'm like, no. And that's where I did step 3. Step 3 is you call it out. I said to Rogers, you want me to move on because you know it's a lie and you've got no response. You've got to call out what's going on. You've got to take a step back, big picture. If somebody is gaslighting and BSing and Gish Galloping in front of an audience, tell the audience what's going on. Let them know that this is not about true or false. This is about disorientation. This is about trying to confuse you. That's what authoritarians do. That's what fascists do, to undermine the media, undermine reality, undermine fact-based arguments, so call it out. So pick your battle, don't budge, call it out. Those are the best options of it. None of them are perfect, but it's what we've got when we're faced with this army of Gish Galapas coming towards us.
So in counseling school, you learn how to listen and be empathic and meet the person where they are. But my question is, okay, I can see these things being used, these tools, on people that are critical thinkers, okay? But when they're not critical thinkers, like, who wants to debate them? I mean, like I was at a party and I said that I don't think that anybody in the United States should make more than $24 million a year.
That's high.
And
it's very generous.
I mean, this is what successfully was done in Greece, in ancient Greece. And I mean, the Republicans started shouting, "You're a pinky commie! You're a pinky commie!" So why would I want? Why bother?
It's a great question, and my answer is don't bother if you don't feel the need to. It depends, again, context matters. Where are you? What's your goal? Whose mind are you trying to change? And people have said to me since the book came out, I just did an interview earlier today on the podcast, and the interviewer said, but why do you want to win every argument? Isn't it good to listen? I said, look, people have misunderstood the title, perhaps some of them deliberately. When I say win every argument, I'm not saying you should go and have every argument and try and win every argument. I'm saying if you want to win an argument in any set place or time, let me show you how. But the first page of the book is dedicated to my wife, who I can't beat in an argument. And I prefer you not to go and take this book and use it with your spouses. So I'm not, if I'd written a book called Drive Every Car, doesn't mean I'm saying to go out and literally go drive every car. I'm saying here's how you could, if you choose to drive different cars, here's some skills. So I'm not telling you to argue with everyone. In fact, I say very openly, someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, would I have her on my show? No, I wouldn't. If she said today, I'll come on your show, it'll be viral, you'll get so many hits, everyone will watch it. Why would I do that? Why would I give you a platform for a woman who clearly doesn't believe half the stuff she says to Gish Gallop on live TV where I wouldn't be able to fact check her in real time? She would say too many nonsensical, offensive, racist, and bigoted things. What is achieved in that point? There's no good faith conversation going on there. So no, I don't have election deniers on my show. I don't have climate change deniers on my show. I don't have Holocaust deniers on my show. There's certain people no thank you. I'm not going to debate you. I won't platform you. Now, other journalists take different approaches, each to their own. That's my position on my show. So yes, you've got to decide, is it worth it? It's a great question. Why bother? But remember, again, if there is an audience, if it's you and somebody shouting at you, commie pinko, but there are 20 other people around that table or in that dinner party who are convincible, persuadable, neutral, maybe you do want to turn away from the person shouting commie pinko, but make your case with your evidence, with your stories, with your tips and tricks to that audience who are persuadable. You just got to be able to unpack what you're doing in any given position and work out who's persuadable, who's not persuadable. And then when you work out who's persuadable, what's the best way to persuade them? Is it with a story? Is it with a statistic? Is it with a way? Is it with finding a common identity? A lot of people, we don't make decisions based on rational evidence. We based on, am I like this person? Do I see myself in that person? Do I have something in common with that person? That's how you have to approach it.
I wonder if you personally have a problem with the kind of polarization that results. I mean, we all know cable news, people, liberals love MSNBC, Trumpists love Fox News. The polarization that occurs because these two sets of groups are not talking to each other. And whether there is anything someone in your position can do to foster sympathy, understanding, empathy across the board. Trump speaks to people who have real fear, resentment, hurt. It's never addressed. How does that get fixed?
It's a great question. So it's a question that's been asked a lot since 2016. Where I would slightly push back is this idea that cable news is either responsible for or the solution to polarization. That isn't the case. Cable news doesn't have the power that people attribute to it. But Fox has its own power within the conservative movement. And I think what grates on me, and this is not, I'm not saying this because I'm an MSNBC employee, I said this when I was an Al Jazeera employee when I was living in the UK, is this idea that kind of MSNBC is for liberals and Fox is for conservatives. No, Fox is not a news channel. I refuse to call it Fox News. And you'd have to take my word for it. You can take the word of Rupert Murdoch, who was deposed in the Dominion case just recently, and says very openly that the hosts don't believe what they're telling the viewers. Now, you can disagree with me as much as you like. You say, Mehdi Hasan is an idiot. He has stupid, pinky, commie views. He's extremist. You can say whatever you want. But you know what? All you have to know is that whatever I'm saying on air, I believe. And I say on air what I say in private. Mark knows this. Everyone who knows me knows this. In fact, I say too much on air of what I say in private. Perhaps I sometimes should restrain what I say on air. In Fox, we know now that Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, all these people are saying in private, this is all nonsense. There is no conspiracy. There is no election fraud. But they're telling the viewers the opposite. So the problem we have now is that 20 to 30% of the public are living in an information bubble. And in that, it's an impenetrable bubble. And it's a bubble in which they are being lied to. And I'm not the one saying they're being lied to. Literally, Fox's owner is saying they're being lied to. So that's a real problem. And, how do you cut through that? I don't think you cut through it by going on Fox. Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, they go on Fox. They do great. People applaud. It's pointless. It doesn't achieve anything, in my view. It only legitimizes Fox. What you need to do, though, is you do need to speak to the people, as you said. And you saw what happened in East Palestine with the train derailment. I think it was a missed opportunity that Donald Trump turned up there before Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and Kamala Harris. I think that was a missed opportunity, whatever you think. You do have to have the conversations. And, social scientists have done a lot of work on perspective taking, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, those conversations. I talk about it in the book as well. And there's deep canvassing. This idea that if you turn up on a doorstep and speak to someone for 10 minutes about gay rights or transgender rights or some thorny social or cultural issue, you can actually change that person's views for up to 3 months after the event. This is what the social scientists are about, having a 10-minute deep canvassed conversation where you listen, where you allow the person to express their prejudices or resentment or ignorance, and then you engage in that subject. So that is what we need to be doing. That is what political parties in this country need to be doing. That is what activist organizations need to be doing. That is what's dried up. Everyone likes to say cable news is the fault. Yeah, cable news has a lot of faults. I say that as someone who works in cable news. But the reality is it's really what's happened to our political process and our political parties, which have withered at a state and local level and left a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. But you're right, we have to keep having the conversations. The point I say in this book is when you have the conversations, be equipped for them. That's the other problem. You could be a great, well-intentioned person and say, well, I'm going to go talk to those people who I think are wrong, and I'm going to convince them. Okay, great, what a wonderful intention. But then you turn up for the conversation, and you're in trouble because you don't have the rhetorical tools to be able to get through to them. And I'm saying, for thousands of years, some of the greatest minds in human history, going back to Aristotle over 2 millennia ago, have been thinking about this stuff, and we've forgotten it. And I try and reintroduce it in this book with examples from ancient Greece and Rome, with examples from US presidential debates, with examples from my own career, to say, you know what? This stuff is teachable, it's doable, it's out there. It's not rocket science, but you do have to put the effort in.
I understand all about doing your homework and research, and you come into a debate, an argument, whatever, with all your bells and whistles, and you're ready to have a knockdown, drag out, and then the other person hits you with something you're not prepared for. And then you sort of sit there, and then you go home and say, I should have said this, I should have said that. How do you handle that situation?
It's a great question. It's one of the tough scenarios. It's happened to all of us. It's happened to Mark, it's happened to me, it's happened to everyone who's ever done this. I think what you've got to do then is, there's a chapter in the book I didn't think I'd end up writing, but I did, and it's called Keep Calm and Carry On. And it is this idea that we get stressed quickly, and the worst thing you can do in any kind of public, not just a debate, not just a knockdown brawl, but just, let's say you're giving a speech. You're at a podium. You're giving a speech to a university hall or to colleagues. You're giving a presentation at work. And you look down and you realize you brought the wrong set of printouts. It's happened to me. You haven't got your notes. And you panic. The worst thing you can do is panic. To stay calm. There's a whole chapter on how you stay calm, what techniques you use to stay calm, and the importance of being calm. Because, yeah, you'll get knocked out. That's fine. You'll get knocked out. You'll get back up again, right? It's never as bad as you think it is my motto. And I've been in some situations where you think, oh my word, I'm done for. And I think that is one of the most important things you can do. There's 2 chapters back to back that I've written in the book, which is in the final third, the behind the scenes, the worthy but dull. It's not dull, but that's what people perceive it as. And I say confidence and calmness. There's a chapter on building your own confidence. If you ask me what are the 2 most important things to speaking in public in front of a crowd, it's to be confident and it's to stay calm. But again, you're not born with those things. They are things that you have to develop and grow. And I think that's the situation. If you are confident and if you are calm, it doesn't matter what anyone throws at you. They could throw the biggest curveball of all, and you could be like, I didn't think of what to say. That's fine. You're confident enough to know that you can recover, and you're calm enough to be able to think of how you're going to recover. Because once you see red, once you lose it, that's it. It's game over. And I tell a story in the book, a very personal story about how I debated a guy called Douglas Murray at Oxford many, many years ago. And he is not just an atheist, nothing wrong with being an atheist, but a very viciously anti-Muslim atheist. And he sees Islam as an evil religion, and we were sitting even closer than Mark and I are sitting. And it's on YouTube, you can go watch it, because I had to go watch it again when I was writing the book to check. And he says, he starts abusing the Prophet. For me, as a Muslim, the most important person in our lives is the Prophet. And he starts saying the Prophet is this and the Prophet is that, and you know all the accusations that are made by Islamophobes. And the video cuts to me and I'm smiling. A friend of mine says, what the hell are you doing smiling? He was like, what are you saying about the Prophet? Didn't you just want to punch him in the face? I said, yeah, it's because I wanted to punch him in the face that I was smiling. Because I knew then if I lose my cool then, I'm going to lose all my wonderful rebuttals that I had for him and that I was able to deploy. Yeah. I'm going to forget about them all. I'll be just so enraged, I'll lose all my structure, all my content, all my planning. And number 2, it's going to give him what he wants, is that he wants to rise. Especially, you know this as a black man. I know this as a Muslim. There are certain stereotypes that come with being who we are. And people exploit those, especially in public places. If you're a woman, that's exploited. There's a whole gender critique when it comes to public speaking, as we know, as female politicians have had to endure. So you don't take the bait. You do not take the bait. You do not rise to that. You do not play that game. And it's very hard. And I had to smile while he said abusive things. One of the other reasons I had to smile is because I have something called RAMF, which is technically called resting angry Muslim face, right? My serious look makes me look angry. And people have said to me, producers in my ear, when the camera cuts to me listening, when I'm listening to an interviewer, somebody said to me in my ear, you look like you want to kill him. And I'm like, no, I'm listening intently. I'm doing critical listening. Yeah, but my face is very... So I have to work at stuff. Even that you have to work at. I talk about even little things like that, you have to work at. Every little counts. Every little thing contributes to it. So you're right. Things will go wrong. I say stay calm, stay collected, and be confident. And work on your confidence. Work on your body language. That's something else. People are left speechless sometimes. I've got nothing to say. That's fine. Let your body language do the talking. Yep. Show that you're not intimidated. Don't back away. Don't shake your head. Don't look down. Don't fidget. All that stuff, again, requires thinking, being conscious. Your body language could be more effective, according to some studies, than what you're actually saying.
Mr. Hasan, what do you think of the living debate between Kennedy idealism and Nixonian pragmatism? It might sound like it's old-fashioned 70 years ago, but actually lately John Mitchum said, I would rather lose as idealist rather than win and called anything else. And President, if we analyze President Nixon pragmatism, you would, I think he was actually an existentialist.
So
we saved the deepest question for
I know. This is what, whenever you squeeze one more question
Nixonian pragmatism versus
idealism.
Kennedy idealism.
I don't know what the question is. Should I be an idealist or pragmatist?
No, not exactly. Actually, that debate between Nixon and Kennedy, it has been shaped our life until the decisions that was made throughout that time. Not to mention the fact that we don't read the textbook, the politician. Those people, we don't work by the textbook anymore. That's why we take the gloves off and we just.
Remember what I said earlier about conceding? I don't know what you're saying, so I'm going to concede. I don't quite follow at the end of time. Sorry, we'll talk about it after if we have time.
Yeah, maybe doing some Q&A. But we really have to go just because we want to make sure there's time for book signing and that everyone gets their book signed and we can have some dialogue.
Let's just take that. I feel bad. That gentleman I hand up literally from the beginning with the red T-shirt. I'm going to take it. Shout out your question. Well, I'm going to give the shortest answer. You're going to give the shortest question. We're going to time you. 10-second question, 20-second answer.
Your book doesn't count. What are the top 5 books that you mastered or you listen to all the time that helped you be who you are today?
It's a great question.
That is a great question. I'm not going to do 5. I'm going to do a quick one. Mark and I were talking about this person just a moment ago. I mean, Alex Haley, Autobiography of Malcolm X, was one that was a great formative book for me. Malcolm was someone who spent a lot of time preparing to become a great debater, then did become a great debater. And it's not just the book that I would read and reread and give to my kids to read, but just go watch some of the YouTube clips. I love on Twitter when a Malcolm clip, somebody shares on Twitter an old black and white clip of him taking apart some, especially foreign policy issue. Love those clips. And I say, you know, this is a book about public speaking. I read a lot of books about public speaking to write the book, and I credit the authors. But I also watched, it was such a great opportunity to go back and watch some great debates, some great speeches. I urge you all, in the age of YouTube, you know, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, Dr. King, even in more recent years, Christopher Hitchens, who I disagreed with a lot and I knew a little bit before he died. But, you know, there are some masterful speakers and debaters, and you really want to see how it's done. I say, go be inspired by other people. It's one place where, you know, plagiarism is not a bad thing. To go and copy someone's style of speech, that is flattering.
There we go. All right, everyone, this is really a wonderful book.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark.
Mehdi